Hey guys, welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. I'm your host, Matt Kime, and today we will be talking about a movie I've been looking forward to with a kind of curiosity-based, cautious optimism. Yeah, I'm talking about the Cool Cat sequel. No, I'm talking about Spiral, directed by Darren Lynn Bousman and starring Chris Rock, Samuel L. Jackson, Max Minghella, and Marisol Nichols. But before we get into the review, just remember to give us a like, comment, subscribe. Every little bit helps us, and we very much appreciate it. Now, let's get right into it. So Spiral is the ninth movie in the Saw franchise, and it's kind of falling under that sequel that's still in the canon timeline, but is, for all intents and purposes, a reboot. Even the creators have come out and said, no, this is not Saw 9, this just happens to be in the same universe, in the same nondescript city, except this time the exteriors were shot in Philly, and as a Philly resident, I recognized a lot of the locations, or at least the shots of City Hall. Yeah, the Saw franchise is kind of a weird one for me, because I was a fan of it growing up, especially the early, like the first 2 or 3 movies, I'd say, and then I'd say, for me, and probably for most people, it just kind of fell off after that. But I always thought the Saw movies were a little bit better in concept than in execution, and so I'd say that this one kind of falls into that category as well. The thing I've always respected about Saw is, especially the first one, is how it did so much with so little, and I'm just a fan of movies that are kind of in that category, the little indie horror movie that could kind of thing. It's like Blair Witch came out of that, can be filed into that category. Halloween, the original one, can. And the other trend that this movie kind of follows is performers who are mainly known as comedians making the jump into something a little bit more serious, namely horror. I mean, Jim Carrey has tried it from time to time, but more recently we're talking like Jordan Peele, David Gordon Green, Danny McBride, and now Chris Rock is the latest to jump into it. So the movie follows Zeke, played by Chris Rock, a grizzled, bitter detective who has been ostracized by the rest of his police department because he turned in his partner for killing an unarmed civilian sometime in the past. And the killer starts targeting people around Zeke and sending the police department clues to let them know that they are in fact playing a game to fight for their lives. So right off the bat, this movie is a lot less like a lot of the more recent Saw movies where it's all these people in location going from one room to the next, fighting off traps, and it's a lot closer to what the original Saw movie, or actually it's actually closer to like what 7 was. Which is kind of funny because this movie, this entire franchise is kind of known for ripping off 7 in a lot of ways, especially the philosophy of the killer and just the grotesque, ironic nature of a lot of the kills. And this movie has that, not necessarily in spades. There's only a couple of like trap scenes in this movie, but when they're there, they're fucking intense. There's the first one involves this guy's tongue, and it's disgusting. And I was sitting there in the theater, and just like I had my hands through my eyes going, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I watching this? The funny thing is I'm not usually squeamish about that stuff, and in fact, I'm so ingrained in horror that I was a haunted house actor for a long time, so this is not a stranger to me, but for whatever reason it made me squeamish. So the movie does deliver on its traps, there's just not very many of them. Quick observation about the traps is that philosophically they're not actually in following with what the original John Kramer Jigsaw did, because he always gave people a way out, and sometimes these traps, it gives their victims a way out, but the way out is so horrible that they're only going to be minutes from death anyway. It feels like the killer's only adopting the aesthetics of the Jigsaw killer and not necessarily the philosophy. The movie kind of sets itself up like Scream, where the killer is contacting the victims and kind of toying with them, both during and between the kills, and it's this big whodunit mystery that everybody has to figure out. And the rest of the cast, Marisol Nichols plays Angie, the head of the police department. Max Minghella plays the younger, newer partner to Chris Rock. Within the first scene, he shows Chris Rock a picture of his wife and kids. I don't think I need to tell you where that goes. Samuel L. Jackson has a nice little turn as Marcus, Chris Rock's father, who helped oversee some of the corruption in the police department's past. And so all of these people are connected, and it's kind of a fun thing to see how everything fits together as the movie resolves. I really like the procedural elements to this. Maybe just I'm just kind of a sucker for that. Like Zodiac's one of my favorite movies of all time. Seven's up there. And this movie definitely isn't on that level, but I like that they went a different direction than just going into the typical gore fest. And it's a lot closer to the original Saw movie that way, where it's more about the mystery than it is about the kills or the payoff in a lot of ways. And so that was something I very, very much appreciated. Chris Rock has some great moments, especially early on. He has some funny lines where he definitely injects himself into the script a little bit. And when he's allowed to do that, the movie is a lot more fun. And so I think he does a good job throughout. Most of the cast, for what they're given, are pretty good. Some of the side characters are just like two-dimensional caricatures, and that's really nothing new for the Saw franchise, but it's kind of disappointing to see it here. For some of the criticisms I have for this movie, the first and the biggest one would be the pacing. Now, reportedly, this movie was one of the many productions that were affected by, well, all the shutdowns, and so certain scenes were scripted that were never shot or had to be cut out because they couldn't get certain people back. And then adding onto that, there were other scenes that had to be apparently cut or altered pretty drastically just to hit an R rating. And so there are like death scenes and traps that just were in the movie and then got cut out entirely. So there are characters that are in the movie that have lines that have significant parts that just disappear halfway through, and you never know what happens to them. The movie never brings it up again, and it's kind of confusing, and the pacing is kind of wonky as a result of that. And there are plot lines, like there's a plot line about Zeke and his wife that gets introduced pretty early on, and you see the wife for I think one or two scenes, and then you never see her again. And it's disappointing because it seemed like a very intriguing storyline, and the movie just goes away from it, and you literally never hear it again. If there's ever an extended edition of this movie, I'd be really curious to see what it looks like, if any of that footage even exists still, just to see what the more complete, I guess, vision of what they were going for was. The killer was obvious if you're paying attention in the movie. It's pretty obvious who the killer is. There's a scene that happens about 2/3 of the way into the movie that's supposed to be a red herring. If you read into it correctly, you'll know exactly what the movie is trying to hide. And so the big twist isn't really a twist. That's not to say that the identity of the killer is bad. It's just could and probably should have been built up a little bit better. One other review on the site has mentioned, I think it was Chris Stuckman's review, that said a lot of the scenes start out at an 11 and then stay at an 11 throughout, and there's not a lot of dynamic range with the pacing in the scenes themselves, and so it seems like they're always at the same level of intensity. There's not really a lot of time to breathe in this movie, and so that I think would fall under pacing again. And after a while, all the screaming and like characters just yelling at each other, it just kind of becomes white noise after a little while. And I can't help but wonder if some of that was affected by some of the shutdowns, because we just saw a major TV show on Disney Plus, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, get damaged pretty hard by some of the same things. So who knows? I'm being a lot more forgiving on this movie than apparently most have, but as far as Saw movies go, this is probably in the upper half of the Saw movies. If I had to like rank the series, I mean, frankly, I'd need to watch them again, but I'd say this is probably in the top 5 Saw movies. So for whatever that's worth to you, that's what the official verdict is. For me, that is worth a yellow light. Proceed with caution. You have been warned. I enjoyed myself. Maybe it was because this was my first time in like a year and a half going to a movie theater, and my God, it felt good to just be in a theater. It was just fucking, oh my God. It was like, so maybe I'm being a lot more forgiving of this movie than others have, but I had a good time while I was watching it, and I think that's really just what this comes down to. I wish the movie could have been fleshed out a little bit more. I think it had some interesting ideas, but like I've said before with the Saw franchise, they're sometimes always a little bit better conceptually than they are in practice. It was nice to see Darren Lynn Bousman, who directed Saws 2, 3, and 4, kind of when the series started to peak and then decline. It was nice to see him back. It was nice to hear the Hello Zep score. And so, yeah, no, I enjoyed myself with this one. to a certain degree. I do think the movie is heavily flawed, which is why it's a yellow. Thanks for sticking with me to the end on this one, guys. If you like what I had to say about this movie, Ben and I are actually going to be talking about this in an upcoming episode of Return of the Movie, and a lot more in depth than what I was able to talk about here. You can watch Return of the Movie anywhere you get podcasts. You can watch it here on this channel. We have a lot of great, interesting movies we're going to be talking about, including Spiral. And we're also doing this little series called First Timers, where one of us picks a bad movie and then forces other people in the room to sit through it. So it's kind of like a Saw game, especially with the movie I picked. I'll just put it this way. The other people in the room with me were shocked and terrified at my choice. First Timers, it's coming up real soon. But until then, it's Full Stop Reviews.